I'd like to thank Flávio, João, Nathan, and Marquez. Okay. Coming here to share your experience with us, and we can start now.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today. We are really glad. Thank you for having us here as a visitors. I've been visiting Semadei since quite some time already. We've been here one year before, but actually I'm always glad to come and then to build up and to strengthen links. Also, thanks for having Flavio here, one member of our team that's working here with you. So it's always very nice to build this collaboration and to think about how we will work together. So before we start, since we also have like a small table, I would suggest that maybe we could, just to know who is here, so maybe we can go around and then introduce ourselves quickly, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm from Albuquerque, professor at the University of Warwick, was before in the University of São Paulo, and I'm in the Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies, have a background in computer science and social science, and work in the interdisciplinary on the use of emerging forms of data for disaster management.
Hi everyone, I'm Nate. I'm a colleague of Joao's at the University of Warwick, and I won't say anything more because I have a slide coming up where I do that. So, hello.
Hi, I'm Conrado Rudolph, and researcher here in hydrology. Working more towards the hydraulic sides of the early warning systems, trying to develop models that can go from predicting discharge into inundation extent, and in the future more orienting this towards impact assessment.
Hi, I'm Patricia. I'm an ecologist and educator. I have experience in education for endangered species conservation, and I just started at Semadei last October to help to organize and launch education campaign. So I work for Semadei Education.
My name is Raquel. I work for Semadei in this same project, educational project, and that we are making it larger in thinking about the relation between Semadei and society as a whole, and it includes crowdsourcing materials. And I have been with João a few times, and now we will discuss even more.
Hi, I am Leona Anderson. I am a researcher here. I work with monitoring of forest and wildfires. We have perhaps the main focus of the project I'm working now is looking at the southwestern part of the Amazon, where it's known as PAN region, so Peru, Bolivia, and Acre states. This region is really interesting because it has been impacted by extremes in the last 15 years. 3 major droughts, 3 or 4 major floods, and we have a very strong collaboration with their state situation room, and we want to take this opportunity to test and develop products that can support decision makers, mostly related to drought events. So I think the kind of products we are thinking about are not the ones such as we have seen there, It's more in the direction of providing information with the month prior to the drought forecast, so can help them to manage and organize in order to mitigate the occurrence of the drought impacts. So we have this project looking at wildfires, and we have a project led by Christopher. He's a meteorologist that will try to assess the impacts on fish production. The state has invested huge amounts of money the last 20 years in fish production as a source for decreasing deforestation and for food security in the state. This is the main projects I'm involved with.
My name is Deborah Elivato. I'm a geography and journalist. I work in education with the same Raquel and Patricia.
My name is Billis. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Warwick. I'm a second year. My topic is the geological dimension of urban resilience. This is what we're trying to find, define, and work through analyzing geohazards, specifically in the UK and in Europe right now. My background is urban planning, and this is something really interesting.
So my name is Flavio, and I'm working with doing my PhD in computer science at the University of São Paulo. I've been working with decision support systems for disaster management. So
I'm Giovanni. I'm a researcher here in the area of meteorology, and I'm working with heavy rain events. Predict them and prevent the disasters. To help assist the decision process to issue the warnings. And I'm also working the operational room as a substitute of the coordinator.
I forgot to say that I'm an anthropologist and environmental educator.
Great. So thank you very much for the introduction. It's very interesting. Also, the one thing that I like here in Semadane is that you are also very interdisciplinary. You have we can already see here in this table, right? So meteorologists, hydrology, and more anthropology, education. So that's really nice to see, because that's also the way we work. So we are at the Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies in the University of Warwick, and what I will do today in terms of talk is then it's more like a discussion really, or a basis for discussion. We will present a bit of the background from where we come in terms of like interests and what we did in the past and what we wanted to do in the future. And the main goal is actually that we discuss possibilities of collaboration. There are some open project calls that I will present some initial ideas to discuss, and then maybe we can go for that. But more than this particular call that I will refer, the idea is really to build a research collaboration in terms of like an agenda for collaborating in the next year. So I've been collaborating a lot with Semadane, but in different ways. Or we have Flavio here. Flavio did a lot of work, which is very connected. It was really rich for us. So we are very happy to build this up and then strengthen this collaboration. So in terms of the presentation, first starting just with two pictures to say that actually like problems in Brazil, I like these two pictures because they show very similar situations in Brazil, in the UK, at also similar times. So actually, I think floods and disasters are becoming more and more a global problem, really. That that require actually local solutions, but in general we have like local characteristics of the problems, but also some common features. And then the idea is really, with this collaboration UK, Brazil, is try to learn from each other in terms of contrasts of different situations, and also explore the things that can be shared in terms of lessons learned and approaches. And that's the main goal of this collaborative enterprise. So, as I said, talk will go to these points. First, I will introduce you some background, and then the key message in this will be like our interests, my interests and Nate's. This is more mine, but then Nate will come to this as well. And then we'll talk about this collaborative project that is ongoing, and that's also funding our stay here and funded our workshop last year, where we'll talk a little bit about it. And then the next steps, which will be really the directions for joint projects in the future, right? So I will talk a bit about my background, Nate will talk, and then jump in, and then also talk about his background, and then we'll talk about our shared interests in this. So first, my background, maybe you are aware of this, I already did some presentations here related to my group, which I had here at the University of São Paulo in São Carlos. Flavio is one of the PhD students. We have 3 more PhD students and 1 postdoc working in this Proletas grant from CAPES. And our specific, we are part of the CEPED USP, which is then the Center for Disasters Research in USP. But our group specifically, I've developed this like kind of framework to show a bit our interests and what different students are working with. Basically, it's like how to merge information from more real-time kind of sources with information from people, the crowdsourced information types, which I presented also a little bit more last time I was here, so I won't go into detail on this. But then the idea is that it's a kind of social technical interest that has to do with dynamics with the population, with like more computational techniques for semantic enrichment and information management and quality assessment of these different information sources, and with decision support to decision makers here in the common room, but also in like policymakers, in municipal authorities, and so on. And there is this component of like interfacing with environmental modeling and thinking about how these sources of information, even like social media, mobile phone applications, and different like crowdsourced kind of data, how these can be used by like environmental modeling to complement the existing information sources in different applications, be it like hydrology, which I've been working with also Eduardo Mario Mediondo, who was here, specifically trying to think about how to fit this in like forecast, flood forecast, and then very importantly citizen engagement. So in terms of this background, what I think it's important to say that like we started from here and then had like in the first years, from my view, some focus here and had some students working on this. And what I am very interested is really going to like this citizen engagement, which was already always an interest, but wasn't like so explored. So this is one part I'm very interested to explore, the citizen engagement part, the assimilation of this data into like modeling and the incorporation of knowledge in decision support. This is a bit of like my main interests in the moment, or like focus for the future activities. In terms of just very briefly of results, we've been working with like this, looking at forms of stimulating the population of produce information like this, using mobile phones to report about levels of the water in rivers, like with these devices here, and this was like a flood we had in São Carlos, and this is first prototype of Flavius' work related to a geo dashboard that tried to combine information from sensors, from real-time water level gauges, with information from people, and then try to put them together and then to explore their complementarities to allow better decision making. And then more recently, we had this work that Flavio presented here. Oh, the image is not so good, but actually, the idea is just to say that Flavio presented us some time ago, so you may remember that. This is only to say that we became interested to see how this kind of data shapes decisions, and then how these decisions can be translated into systems, which is then the next step. And we've been interested to see what types of information are really important for specific types of decision making. And this is also a background for the more recent kind of interest that we are developing, which is to understand better how this data, different types of data, allow different forms of relationship of decisions. And then what's the best form to present data, how to combine this data in different forms to allow better decision making, and then to support more effectively these processes on the one hand. On the other hand, how to understand the influence of data in the types of decisions that are being made, and in the how we can take into account, for example, social cultural factors that are more difficult to formalize into data, and then how to understand the relationship of data with this. So yeah, this is pretty much my background then. I think.
Okay. Yes. Well. So I have a background in culture and communication, actually, which so I'm Australian, and what that means for me specifically is digital media studies. But I'm trained really in the interpretive traditions, so semiotics, textual analysis, discourse analysis, stuff that's quite specific to media studies. I joined the Centre for Interdisciplinary Methodologies in 2012 as the first appointment after the director, and as of January I'm acting as deputy director now for the centre. Since I finished my PhD in 2012, I wrote this manuscript that is the result of my PhD work. It came out last year or 2 years ago now with the University of Chicago, and it's a study of the organization of Wikipedia, so how the project is made, and it in some ways pulled me more into the social sciences, because it was a period of the web where people began to celebrate user-generated content and participation and collaboration, and move away from a kind of industrial form of media consumption into what we now all take for granted. But it was trying to capture those dynamics, which meant moving away from textual analysis and looking in more sociological ways at how people work together, and how they make rules spontaneously, and how those rules structure projects over time. And so really my work since then, across a number of other edited collections as well, is really interested in broad questions around how technology changes culture and organization. So since moving to SIM, I received money from the Economic and Social Research Council in 2014 and led this project called Interrogating the Dashboard, data indicators and decision making. Basically, that project was an attempt to say something about the prevailing discussions around big data, which have kind of swept over the humanities and social sciences and most other parts of research as well. And our angle or take was that a lot of discussions around big data and data transformation were around epistemological questions around data, like changes from causality to correlation, these kind of early discussions around volume and variety, etc. And we thought instead of thinking about kind of data in this abstract sense or in terms of epistemology, that we would look at data kind of in like as it's being used, you know, in a very kind of straightforward way. So we thought that information dashboards, which also seem to be increasing. I mean, the control room here with the dashboard is a kind of a long-standing example of these types of screens. But what we were interested in is these types of screens showing up in places where they previously would never have been. So, like through personal fitness devices to any kind of activity. So it's kind of a shift to like the everyday of data practice. And so our project looked at dashboards in a number of different settings, from commercial organizations. We looked at the use in hospitals. One of the main case studies was a study of the government digital transformation team in the UK. And these people have created over 800 dashboards, one for every service that the government provides. So a dashboard about people applying for a driver's license, a dashboard for a patent application, a dashboard for the number of prison bookings that have been made. So like every single service has a dashboard, and we were looking at like in quite broad, sometimes historical ways, like what it means to have these dashboards. And one of the things that we found was in the government setting, for example, there's a lot of discussion around transparency, and a lot of these initiatives around increased data and dashboards is presented as a transparency initiative. But what we found really was, like for the people who work in the government, really these dashboards are much more about performance management, and the discussions around transparency really fall away very quickly, and it's about measuring like how people are working. And the second finding that we thought was quite significant was it also comes along with a real increase in design, specifically like web and interaction design. So the teams who are tasked with working with data, with creating dashboards, they're working from within a web design paradigm, which shapes how the government then organizes and manages itself. So things like agile management, which comes from software, is dropped into these teams and departments. They work with design principles to kind of organize their everyday activity. And so by looking at dashboards rather than kind of data in the or big data in the abstract, it kind of gives a different sense of like what it means for an organization to be working with data. It means that management starts to be restructured by design thinking, and that there's kind of more performance management. This is like one of the findings, to give you an example of what I'm interested in. And then kind of after that project, but still very much kind of within that framework, I continue to be interested in thinking about how to study data as like an empirical entity, how to think about how data moves and when data like matters, and quite often that's around decision making, but also other components of like organizational practice. And then my thinking in this area is really trying to come to terms with the idea of being data driven. So there's a lot of discussion around data-driven techniques or data-driven organizations or data-driven practices, and I'm trying to understand like what do people actually mean when they say we're data-driven? Like if data has an increased role or increased power, like how does that actually play out? Like are there moments where you can say like data now matters in this way and it didn't used to in the past, or so I'm interested in these types of questions and in thinking about how data is kind of moving in different ways. So that's kind of my general interest, and yeah, I'm very excited to be here again. So thanks for having me.
Great. So moving forward, then we'll talk a bit about like the collaboration. So the last part, which has the background, is that when I came to the Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies in Warwick, then we started to dialogue and to work together. We saw two different perspectives. Then we saw, well, maybe we can like do something related to this that covers the crowdsourcing, the interests on these new forms of data, and the interests on decision making and the data practices. And then we started this project, which was funded by the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. It would be like the CNPq from the UK for the specific area of engineering and computer science, actually, physical sciences in general. And then we got this grant to develop the collaboration, which is what they call the pub priming, so which is a grant for developing collaboration, for developing a new area, and for developing a new proposal. And we started this last year, and this is now finishing. So it's a short grant, only targeted at like fostering this and then generating ideas and new project proposals. And then maybe the biggest activity, the largest activity of this grant here was a workshop that we had last year in Warwick, where we invited different people. Also, Mario Mediono from Semadei at that time came as representing Semadei, and then we had other people coming from CPRM and from other universities, from USP, from UFJ, and this was the one main activity. The second thing that this project is funding is Flavio's work now. Flavio's just finishing the PhD actually. Tomorrow, hopefully, let's say.
Tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow. And then is continuing to work with us in this project, and then that's part of the...
It depends on how you go tomorrow, but...
Yeah. Let's see. If he passed, he'll continue working here with you in Semadei. If not, he'll probably die from heart attack.
Is this bullying?
So just to explain that, like, Flavio's work here is also funded through this initiative now. And just summarizing quickly this workshop that we had last year, was a workshop for discussing directions, and I will just really briefly say what the directions we are thinking about, and then come to specifically the points that we would like to discuss with you. So we had like about 30 participants from the British Geological Survey, CPRM, Semadei, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and University of São Paulo. two invited guest speakers, presentations, and so on. And then especially what was very interesting was the small group discussions and generation of ideas. So some topics we discussed was disaster risk management and comparison between UK and Brazil, these problems, these contrasts, the role of different institutions, the role of citizens and citizen science and involving citizens. The interesting feature here is that also in the UK, there is more and more of a talk about involving citizens in flood prevention and flood response as well as here. So we thought it was very interesting to see that for different reasons and in different contexts with different kinds of events, there is like this idea that the resilience is more and more dependent on the local communities, and that they have to be also very carefully engaged in initiatives. And then we discussed about social media and then more technical issues on interoperability and data. And some results or some directions is really that there has been a feeling that there is lots of synergies to explore, and that we had like the idea is that we would like to discuss this interdisciplinary pathways for future projects and how we take into account these new perspectives that come from like geology, hydrology, environmental sciences on the one hand, on the other hand more computational sciences with more real-time data treatment and incorporation of like more participatory kind of technologies, and the social sciences and humanities perspectives of citizen engagement, understanding better social cultural issues. So this is pretty much the direction. And in terms of project ideas, like we came up with this idea of discussing these two. One is like Semadane maybe shows very clearly, like in the control room, this idea of coming to the problem of risk from a perspective that takes like data and do analytics in this data and looks from above or kind of top-down view. And we have like in the other hand this more bottom-up approaches which come from the community, from trying to like engage the community to produce data and to think about what is resilience, what is risk. And then we thought, well, maybe this contrast really between like a top-down approach and a bottom-up that doesn't have to be really like a kind of opposite or kind of like exclusive, but rather complementary. But the challenge is really how to do it not well, or how to complement, really, to integrate these two perspectives in one. So this is a bit the initial thinking. And we started discussing also in the direction of, there is a call of the Belmont Forum. I don't know if you know the Belmont Forum. It's like kind of joint initiative of different funding agencies. And there is one specific that is open now about transformations to sustainability that make us think that this may fit in terms of, in Brazil is FAPESP, which is involved. And in the UK is, in this case, ESRC, which is the Social Sciences Research Council. And also it includes other partnerships that I've been talking to partners in Germany, in which I'm working, where I'm working before actually, in the Institute of Geography. And one basic framework we came with in terms of like topics of possibilities for which to discuss, and that we would like to bring today for discussion and hear your feedback and your opinion and how could we work together on this, is about this idea, like this top-down and bottom-up, like is in the picture there. The idea that actually what we need to integrate these two perspectives is a kind of data governance. So what we call like this resilient data governance that interfaces also with like more municipal administrations, but also that thinks about these flows of data that come from the one hand from the community level considering bottom-up, local knowledge, like this idea of community resilience, and thinking that the resilience is actually also pretty much dependent on the community. And then take into account things like tacit flood memories or like experiences in that particular region that may not be so easily to put into data or like to formalize. They are different in terms of like knowledge in comparison to rainfall gauges or to water levels or to this more formalized way of seeing risks. And that includes citizen participation. And on the other hand, the hazard management, which is this top-down view, and then that has the advantage of doing like more analytical approach and then modeling approaches. And that's exactly but also has like opportunities to incorporate more and more the real-time sources, data sources, more data science kind of techniques as well. And then we felt that like the Pathways also has a particular like topic on governance, and we thought that would be interesting to explore this idea of resilient data governance in terms of like the data, how the data flows from the community to above, but also from the like how one thing that we very much like it today, seeing the risk maps that you are producing and then hearing that they are being used for news in the TV. Now, how the data that is produced here also flows back to the community, to the city administration. In that case, through the TV, but also thinking about like how to do different ways of working with the community that at the same time have these two like directions. First, you work with the community to get data on the one hand, but not only to get data, but also to engage the community in understanding better risks through data, and then also presenting the kind of knowledge and on risks that you produce here in Semaden, for example, back to the community. And then it might be that, for example, this map is good like for one public, and for other publics that you have to present it differently. And then you have to think about how to reach, for example, if you're thinking about school children, people. So how these kind of knowledges reach this particular publics, or how it reaches different members of the community, and then it is able to really build community resilience in the long run by embedding, so to speak, this knowledge into the community. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say something at this point.
No, I think that's that captures a lot. But I mean, just one specific thing that well, at least I'm interested in. But I think we share this interest is thinking about. I mean, when we talk about like embedding data, like thinking quite literally and materially about like what kind of signals can be turned back into signs that are meaningful in the local context. So a kind of an act of translation where data produced or if not produced, that kind of comes through Semaden, can be recontextualized in ways that can create these types of like tacit engagements or new types of memories or narrative, or literally like material or like icons, like drawing a picture that shows very clearly like when there's danger or when there is not danger. So thinking about in some ways like a different type of sensor that can be kind of sensed immediately at the local level as well. So these types of things that I think we're interested in thinking about.
Yeah, so
on the one hand, like this idea of like having engaged citizens through these like materials or through information that you present to them in different forms, and then making these really a research question. What's the best form to present like this knowledge to the community on the one hand? But what I like in this picture is that it's a kind of presentation that fosters also participation, that fosters engagement and production of new information. That, for example, if people take the smartphone and then say, well, and this particular day the water was in this height, then it's like, again, a form of like feeding back, and then that can be used for calibration of hydrological models or for calibration of like different approaches and then risk assumptions that normally have difficulty to consider like very heterogeneous conditions of the local, very local, let's say, conditions of specific places. And this is then, so maybe bi-directional in the sense that it is both like bringing information to the community, but also thinking about what kind of information from the community can be useful to, for example, to do better warnings and then to do better forecasts or to improve in the long run the capacity to understand, for example, the impact of these like heavy rainfalls in specific places, in specific communities, the impact of like different hazards, maybe also fires, to specific communities, and then maybe thinking what kind of information also, like what kind of data, and then I think the focus on data is interesting because of this, because you can think about like what kind of data can flow like back to the like more scientific view, and then how this scientific view flows also into the community, and how can we like enable these translations that can be beneficial for both sides. Yes.
This might actually even be a research question, but I'm thinking. So you're showing a methodology of how you can analyze data flows and top-down, bottom-up approach and all that. But I'm wondering about the variability in data availability in both sides, and this variability spatially. So if we're talking about the UK and Brazil, there's a big difference in terms of models we run in real-time simulation with inundation extent being generated and all that specific data, and then there's all this from the bottom-up side. There's a difference in maybe in education level or in some notion of handling this data, looking at a flood map and knowing where I'm at, where's my house, and what kind of feedback I can give in terms of how the flood is developing and knowing the process, And then you come to Brazil, if we talk about, São Paulo, where people are much more experienced, but at the same, so there's more, there's less data in comparison to the UK, let's say, in terms of the models and all that. But people are more used to the phenomena and all that. But then you come to São José dos Campos, and then there's some amount of data on both sides, and then you go to Acre, for instance, and then there's no models, no data that can be provided from the top down, and less people with cell phones available, to really give feedbacks or even knowing what type of feedbacks that they can go. So there's a whole lot of work to be done on that end. So I'm just kind of trying to discuss about the spectrum
Yes.
of these different realities of data availability. You know, like from the UK side to the ACRI reality, and then São Paulo, so that comes falling somewhere in between. But so, in your project, have you focused, let's say, are you taking study sites on these different spectrums, somewhere along the spectrum, or are you, no, let's deal with something around here for the UK and something around here for Brazil? We know there's going to be different approaches, so we're going to compare them, or are we going to try, you know, are there different methods that are going to come up for the different situations that we're looking at? So in that sense, what are your thoughts?
Oh, great question. Thanks. Actually, totally good point, because I think that's part of the challenge. One thing we've been discussing is that actually, like, although floods are like now a global problem, let's say if you want to take floods as one particular example, the solutions are so local because of this like heterogeneity. And then this spectrum that you described is exactly what we want to understand better, really. Because like, if you take the UK situation, it's also not clear how to involve citizens in that context, although they might have more knowledge. In one cities in the UK, they have a lot of experience with floods and then of coping with floods for like centuries, and in some cities in Germany as well. And this is a particular like kind of community engagement that you have to do. But also sometimes in these communities there is heterogeneity within the communities, so that like older people have much more local knowledge than younger people, for example, and that also like has to be accounted, so that different groups within the communities are also spatially and also heterogeneous in terms of like. And I think to answer like how to answer your question in terms of how to cope with this heterogeneity, the idea is really that all these interventions have to be localized, have to be like co-constructed with the community. So we're probably looking at an idea of a project where we do specific engagement with some communities, let's say 1 or 2 in Brazil, 1 or 2 in the UK, and maybe 1 in Germany. And we do specific interventions with this community that try to take into account all this like community background, existing flood memories. That was one point. So the tacit like knowledge that is there in the community already, and then the existing infrastructure in terms of sensing infrastructure, the existing expertise and expert knowledge views, and try to understand in that context what would be the best governance arrangements, local arrangements, and then thinking about like working from this context with the community to produce like approaches that would bring knowledge closer to them, which are really like co-shaped by the community. So how the community really wants to see this kind of knowledge, right? So this is what we like, some more participative approach, and then like we'll have to do a little bit smaller scales, choosing examples in this spectrum, like in order to then tackle them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important question that you raise, but I think it's probably fair to say that our project isn't about trying to get more data or to include the most marginalized regions, which is obviously extremely important, but I don't think it's something that's within the scope of what we're doing. And I mean, it also I mean, related to the kind of specific engagement is because like having more data, I mean, one, like sometimes you can have like too much data and then you don't need any more, and other times you don't have enough data, like no matter how much you have. But I think like a big challenge around kind of data-driven like forms of observation or mapping is that it's an open question about what can be done with that data. Like you can have like lots of great data and you can't do anything anyway. And you know those are other questions. They're governmental questions. They're questions about resources. They're like and so that capacity to act, like when you have the data, is you know is something that's completely open, and it's equally a challenge in the UK, in the States, where you have a lot of these like new types of like smart applications, produce all kinds of data for like local government, and government just don't have the resources to act on that data. Like, so it's like it's not always even meaningful for them to have really fine-grained data about. I mentioned this the other day, but like the quality of the roads. Like if there are potholes in the road, there's an app that can kind of tell local government, or like numbers about local bin collection and whether the rates of bin collection or particular service not performing. So if there aren't the resources, then like why bother even having the data if you can't act on it?
But I guess if you share that data, then you can actually have the community managing their own situation, right? With that data available, so it's not up to the government won't be able to be there for him, but he knows that his house is going to be flooded in a day or so, and so he starts to get his furniture up or do something.
That's
himself,
exactly the discussion that's going on.
I mean, I think that's kind of where some of the interesting things is like when, and also like what does that mean in terms of governmental relationship? Like when is it a kind of a retreat of government obligations, or when is it something that can complement? And I mean, I think that's stuff that we're really interested in thinking about. Kind of through the project.
I have two more questions, which is one is related to the scale, and previous to that is your focus more on producing like flood risk for planning purposes, or is it for early warning systems? Because I think they are both. There's a good amount of information that can be used for both activity, but they have different objectives, right? Yes. So it'd be interesting to get a feeling of the products that you're going to generate or what your outcomes. Is it more for planning, decision making in terms of planning, of showing like a city administration, showing them you guys are you have all this area that's at risk that you weren't able to map with your resources, but we're here presenting a map that we were able to come up with community level information showing that you have all this area at risk and flooding is getting worse. So how are you going to deal with that for the next 50 years, let's say? So that's something for planning, right? And the other objective could be something for, like yesterday I was driving and there was a sign, likelihood of storms in the afternoon. Okay, so only based on the meteorological information on the previous days of having a lot of flooding in town, they were issuing that alert while you were driving. So, but you can have more sophisticated ways of giving people information and collecting information to share, in the sense of giving warnings, right? So I think those are two different objectives with a lot of complementarity.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, the second question is regarding the scale. If you're going to deal with something more community level, then your study site is something more like a city or town, or a couple of samples of cities and towns. But since we're in a national center for early warnings, we like to do, or we're supposed to focus also on things that are more on the national scale.
Yes.
Like, so for instance, I see that today we're starting to have availability, and now I'm talking more on the planning side, availability of flood hazard data, flood hazard maps on a global scale. And Brazil doesn't have a flood hazard map for the country because of the scale, and it's also lack of data on floodplains.
Yeah.
But we have a national, what we call is the flood vulnerability map done by ANA.
Okay.
And it was basically I'm not sure if you can say if it's a crowd sensing method of making it, because it was basically they have a map of the hydrographic map,
right?
And they went to in each town where they had flood occurrences, they went and they asked questions to the civil defense. They asked them, was this town flooded in the last 5 years? Yes or no? If it was yes, they painted that section, that vector, the whole stretch of reach of river where that little town was in red. It was flooded on the last 5 years, so painted in red. And then they went to the next one. Oh no, this was flooded only between the last 5 and 10 years. Okay, so yellow. And then they went to another town. No, this didn't get flooded in the last 10 years. Okay, green. So we have a official national flood vulnerability, which is what they called, but very questionable concept of vulnerability, which painted the rivers in these colors based on the flood vulnerability, and it wasn't like from a technical perspective, we would like to do flood really
modeling,
inundation topography, hydraulic modeling, and really being able to find what is the 100-year flood, the 50-year flood, 20-year flood, and then you have the hazard, and then you put in information from the land use, and then arrive at a flood risk map, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have the resources. We haven't gotten to that point where we can produce that. And so they went on and did something like that, which is more of a crowd sensing method, I think. And that was done on a national level. So I'm just bringing an example of what was done on the national level, which there's a lot more work that can be done to improve.
Yeah.
And then here we're talking about things that can be done more on a community level, maybe to a local, to a city or something more locally, in terms of a study site. So my second question is, in terms of scale, what is your objective? What type of scale would you like to be focusing more on?
Two very good questions. One temporal scale, planning, early warning related to the event, the other more geographical, right? Well, I'll say some thoughts about it, but actually it would be great to hear what you think would be the also, or to have a discussion about what will be the best fit here. Well, my initial thoughts are that actually, in terms of like planning or early warning, I feel that this kind of community engagement in the long run has one specific objective, which is really build community resilience, which is more like the preparedness, risk planning, more before the event, and then building capacity to respond, then really response, right? So then really like closer to the response, and then early warning, and then real-time early warning. So my feeling is that this kind of intervention is targeted more towards this like temporality of building up capacity in the long run, and that is very connected to planning, as you said. But this doesn't exclude the fact that you may come up with, like for specific places where you don't have really good early warning system places, and there you have really a lack of data in terms of like measuring, then to explore possibilities of like building up this community level to early warning systems is also something we can do. So I think it will depend a bit on the communities and then how, and the systems and how we see the potential. But I think I would focus first on this more longer run kind of temporality, that tries to build capacity in the community. And that to build capacity meaning that also if you have like better like social vulnerability kind of data, you would also be able to do better early warning, right? Because then you would consider that I think that's where it touches more directly early warning in my head at the moment. It's like to think about more granular ways of taking into account the social cultural heterogeneity when you do early warning. Not only the hazard heterogeneity, but also the more social cultural and the impacts, or introducing more the ways of getting insights about the local impact of the hazards. And this would like allow you to better early warning here. That's the way I'm thinking at the moment. But then less about like really real-time data collection, right? So in this particular case, and more about like collection that will have this more longer term, but could influence in this overlap with early warning in terms of like the better understanding of local conditions for doing better warning. And the second thing about the scale, that's also a very good question, geographic scale. I think the idea is like for doing like the experiments, because it will be like participatory and then experimental, it has to start small scale, like in a more city level, neighborhood level even, like in a city. But the idea is really then will be a challenge like how to scale up to the level you work here. Of course, this will be an open challenge. I think the project can address this in the sense that it will think about like approaches that can be scaled up, but actually the scale up really can't be done in the project itself. The project will be more targeted towards like it is a time frame of 3 years, something like that. So like doing proof of concept with some communities and then being able to assess the effects of this kind of interventions in the community in a more like nuanced way and understand them. I think that's would be like within the project, and then the thinking about the scale up and then thinking about like how to like have this in other places will be like something to keep in mind and to assess, but not contained within the context of the project.
I mean, I think also that, scale is something that you can take like as given, and you can think about like what scale are we on. Yeah. But I think our approach to scale would be to like to follow data as it moves through scale. I mean, like the national scale is an aggregation of data from smaller scales, and I think if our project can move, I don't want to say kind of cut through, but can just do like a small little part, but that goes perhaps back and forth. I mean, places like this are what create the national scale, and I think if we have involvement in these places and we look at data that is going like back and forth, then in some ways we're participating in a kind of inner scale or a scaling that means that we certainly can't deploy what we do everywhere, but that to recognise that scale is brought into play through the work, and that's something that you have to be sensitive.
I have one question and one comment. So the question, what I was thinking when you talk about the cultural knowledge, I'll take as example Acre State again. It's a place where it has been proven that has a intensification of the hydrological cycle, which means that rainfall and floods event has been changing and quickly through time.
Yeah.
And thus, let's say the ribeirinhos or the community that has been living there for a long time, they have, let's say, lost the sense on how to assess or to read the natural indicators, the rivers, and how it goes. So I think it's something that I don't know how it would come, but it's something that must be part in the structure when you try to bring this kind of information, even if it's just to understand or to quantify that it's changing and we don't know the direction, but it will emerge in depending on where you focus. And my comment, which I think I will truly try to sell my cup of tea, is again talking about Acre State. Because I think we have a very particular condition there that would be interesting pilot case for some reasons. One reason is the floods that they have been experiencing there. And Conrado and Márcio are involved with the project, right, with a modeling approach to provide the situation room. The situation room there has also some particularities, which is related to the project that we have been working there, which is called Resilience Communities. And they have done a project which I think is incredibly interesting, is to take the kind of alert that they produce for floods or fires, and the school children, they are producing their own alerts. So they compile information from the internet, and then they produce like a similar something that they can take back from school to their house. This is mainly in the municipalities where they do not have like the civil defense acting. So they use, let's say, the kids as the one that will communicate the risks to their communities if they are more isolated. Another aspect that is very interesting is that you have one main river that crosses different municipalities. And during the last, they had two big floods in 2014 and 2012. In 2012, the municipalities that comes before in the river, they could track the event was coming and try to communicate to the next municipality so they could get prepared. In the second event, that worked a little bit better. So you have some kind of connection and they are trying to emerge with something. And I think this idea of to see how the information are moving from one municipality to the other. And this is the kind of organization that's not the government but the federal center that came in and told them. It's just they emerged, they saw that the disaster was coming, and they got organized in that sense. So I would say like a chain of events from one municipality to the other. The other aspect that I think is interesting is that, for example, if you are working in Rio Branco, which had a neighborhood that in 2015 was flood, it's not like a flash flood. When the flood comes, it's like the Amazon characteristics. The town or the neighborhood will be underwater for 20 days. So you have not the immediate impact, but you have like the long distress that will cause for the community or the neighborhood, and will prevail for the months after the event has come. So the reconstruction, the cleaning, and all this process. So I think this is another characteristic that if we think about the footprint that will be on people, like their memories and their experiences, is a strong thing. But usually is not associated with a high number of deaths as when you have like these flash floods in southern parts of Brazil. The other aspect is that you have the municipality and they work very closely, for example, in Rio Branco, with the state situation room. And we are in the federal level working very close to the state situation room. So when you are talking about the flow of information, we should think that you have like this kind of relationship is kind of already built. I can say that it's working, it's not working the best way because mostly from our side, I think we fail as a scientist to take the time and perform like more communication and organize more meetings with them so we can really have a better spectrum. So this is one thing that we want to improve this year, is like just our communication with them. But at least you can have like to see how the information is coming and go through the different political levels in Brazil. And the final aspect that I think is the cultural diversity, because agri-states, like in the Western Amazonia side, you have population that have migrated from different parts of Brazil to live there, and you also have the traditional population. So you have a mix of it's really like cultural relationships with the environment, with the town, in the from people that live in cities, for example, in São Paulo or in the more developed areas. So I think from these aspects is a very interesting study case. And I think when I think what you need to perform this kind of analysis, I think we do have some of these elements. And maybe Raquel wants to say something more about how she sees this situation.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that. Your second research question there is to integrate this kind of data. And if we think about what happened in Acre, and also because we work with schools and we distributed rain gauges, semi-automatic rain gauges to the schools, and they are collecting data locally. And the schools with the fishermen and together. The community and the schools through different areas of the project. You have a certain kind of data that is being produced, and I think it lacks the feedback on education in your second question, that it enhances the culture of prevention through participation. And through understanding, real understanding, and not only doing crowdsourcing for punctual kind of data or for a more mechanic relationship. And we had an experience also with Lorena. It's a resilient city, kind of the name of it. And Giovanni was the main operator of this experience. But it's also generating local rain gauges data with the Federal University here in close to here. Unifesp. Yeah. And it's a small thing. And I wanted to think about this experience also through the experience of Cunha that we had. Really, the school devoted itself. All the high school classrooms did research on memories, on oral history, and in registered, and on the watershed, local watershed, and its relation with the watershed with São Luís do Paraitinga, for instance, because we have these two schools, and the rain gauges. And they did amazing researches, invented things on these researches, like building different kinds of homemade rain gauges, different kinds of materials and shapes and compared. So they did really science, technical science at the school. And they actually involved the whole community into this memories research, for instance. And 900 students did all these researches. And in the end of the year, we went together there for a dialogue between researchers from Semadem and very young researchers from the schools. And it was a real horizontal dialogue on their research. And we were really amazed about everything that happened there. But it's a kind of work with the community. And the community really was thrilled with it. And they registered a barber, guy that was interviewed for about his memories from floods, previous floods, and the guy said never a school has done something like this, and they included a question in their questionnaires that was how was, according to the interviewer of the person that was interviewed, according to him, what was a way of dealing with it, the solutions for the problem. And everybody contributed with the solutions even, not only the memories, but for the future. So the results were unmeasurable. And we are still working with the school in order to write about that, because it was an amazing experience, how it flooded the community with information also. And you have a different kind of relation with the community, that is the crowdsourcing, that I would say it's big data from the communities. And this has to be dealt in a very special way. We need a mass of information first, and how do you educate people to contribute with this information? And then we will be able to see the complementarity of both ways of getting data. So it's a longer range kind of research, but has to be done with. And later we will talk about this part more, because we are working with droughts and with floods and with landslides. So we have to get data from all these kinds of things. And how do you get to people? Not only schools, but the community also. And we are working on this, and it will be great to collaborate in this sense.
One thing that I want to comment, maybe related with Liana, is this app, Sickaway, which can be understood as a kind of crowdsourcing, but not from community, not from communities or citizens, but from people, specialized people, experts. I don't know if it's right.
Yes. So this app, I'll talk about a little bit. It's not my project. Who leads is Ana Paula. She will be here next week. So it started. It was thought to collect information on the agricultural practice in the northeast of Brazil. The northeast is a semi-arid region, and the idea was to use the information of the cultural practice, such as type of seeds, date of planting, date of cropping, amount of production, etc., from the small farmers, to feed a model which is being developed, a agrometeorological model that is being developed by Marcelo Zeri here. And the idea is to, based on this information, they can detect to see if the drought will impact the growth of that crop in a momentum in which it will not be able to produce. So that municipality can, in advance, ask support from the government for food security reasons. And talking with Ana Paula, so this model was, this app was developed by IESA, I think in Austria. They developed different sets of apps. And after that, they are just now bringing the code to Samadeng, and I think at some point we will have the code and be able to really work on it. And by that time, the app was called AgriSupport. And with the development of our collaboration, we started to think that we have to make it a little bit wider. So introduce a practice such as if the person uses fire, because then you're increasing the risk of fire. So then I will start trying to include information that also fits the Amazon, but it's still more focused on the data collection. The way it works is, or the way they thought for the app to work, is you have the SEMAs, the state secretaries for agriculture, and they do have technicians that are the ones that go to the field and give support for the small farmers, etc. These are the ones that will collect the information with the app. What kind of information? When you go there, you just fill like a kind of a smart table, and you take a photo of the place, and the objective of the photo is more to get the geolocation of that part. This information, we're going to receive it here, but the user also can create one account, and then they will have the information that they are collecting in storage there. And at some point, the idea is that you're going to see not only your information, but also your neighbors' information. So you can have this sense of what's going on in your area, what kind of seeds they are using, if they are more successful than us, etc. So, and now what we are thinking about the development of this app is that is based on the limitations we have to perform our research. We need data on impact. We need data on their practice. We need the data on the vulnerabilities. And it would be very good if we can transform this app in a way that we can collect this different information. For example, last year there was this huge drought that affects agri-state. And people from the State Secretary of Agriculture, they are reporting that they observed that many fruit trees were dying. And but they do not have this information. They do not know how this impacts. They do not even know how how it affects the small farmers. It's just something that they started to observe. It was even observed after the bulletin that we emitted to them, saying that there was a vegetation stress condition, and then they started to ask for the agricultural people in the field if they were observing something. So we see that is a way that we can also help to organize a data set, the information, in a way that they can use, we can use for research, and then they can use for their own management of their practices, of their impacts, of their resilience. So I think this is how I explained the effort.
And just to complement,
Yes.
Ana Paula came to me and she said, how do we get to these peasants today? And we are thinking about doing through the high school. Activities as a high school that takes the students to their parents that work there. It's small farms. And so we are going to collaborate in this sense. So the students will help.
Great.
That's a collection.
It's not related with floods or landslides that you have been doing research, but it's kind of
Yes.
useful
Yeah.
for, for maybe it could be another case study, not with floods, but try to analyze the consequences of the system, how to, for example, request data for the community, which is how the information that's provided by the community is useful for the decision makers, and try to analyze this context.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I think we are not transmitting anymore.
Acabou a bateria.
Ah, é a bateria?
É.
Mas acho que eu posso falar
Por
pra
causa da
eles.
temperatura do Eu vou tentar chamar o
Eu chamo,
Fernando.
vou falar pra ele.
Eu vou chamar
So I think it's almost
Yeah, so maybe we can actually let the other talk to the afternoon if that's